Imagine waking up one morning to find strangers pounding on your door, flashing badges that didn't look quite right, demanding you comply with the HOA. But here's the thing. I never signed up for their rules, never agreed to their control, and certainly didn't expect them to send fake cops to intimidate me. What they didn't realize was that the ground they stood on, the very office they worked in, didn't even belong to them. It belonged to me. So how does a powerless homeowner turn the tables on an entire HOA? When I first moved into the neighborhood, life felt like everything I had worked so hard for was finally paying off. The street was lined with neatly trimmed lawns, kids rode their bikes in the cul-de-sac, and the kind of quiet peace hung in the air that made you believe you'd found a real community. My home sat at the edge of the block, a little bigger than most, with a wide stretch of land I'd poured countless hours into caring for. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, a place where I thought I could finally settle down without constant worry. For the first few months, things seemed normal. Neighbors waved when I passed, conversations about weather or weekend barbecues filled the sidewalks, and life was calm. But I couldn't help but notice one thing that set me apart. Nearly everyone on the street was part of the HOA. They had the newsletters, the community meetings, the little stickers on their mailboxes that marked them as in. I, on the other hand, wasn't. I hadn't signed up. I never felt the need to pay someone else to tell me how short my grass should be or what color my front door was allowed to be. At first, it didn't matter. Nobody said much. Maybe a polite reminder slipped into conversation here and there, but nothing more. Still, I started to see hints that being different carried a price. An HOA representative once walked slowly past my property, jotting something down on a clipboard. My trash cans were mysteriously pushed into the street when everyone else's stayed neatly tucked away. And the way a few neighbors avoided eye contact with me at the mailbox, it wasn't hard to sense I was already being watched. It was all subtle, small enough to make you second guess whether it was intentional or not, but deep down, I knew. I didn't fit into their mold, and they weren't going to let it slide for long. What I didn't know then, standing on my porch and breathing in what I thought was the start of a peaceful new chapter, was just how far the HOA was willing to go to force me under their control. And worse, how their biggest mistake was already rooted in the very ground beneath their feet. At first, the pressure from the HOA was almost laughable. They started with letters. Generic notices slipped into my mailbox that accused me of violating rules I never agreed to follow. Things like the length of my grass, the color of my shutters, and the fact that I didn't have one of their mandatory mailbox designs. Each letter had the same threatening tone, the same fine print reminding me that non-compliance could result in fines. I ignored them, of course. How could they fine me when I wasn't even a member? That's what made the situation almost amusing in the beginning. But the amusement didn't last long. Soon, the letters turned into personal visits. HOA board members I had barely spoken to started showing up unannounced at my property, clipboards in hand, taking pictures of my yard like I was some kind of criminal. They would stand there, just far enough back to stay on the sidewalk, but close enough to make their presence impossible to ignore. The message was clear: we're watching you. When that didn't break me, the warnings escalated into fabricated fines. Envelopes began arriving with official-looking headers, claiming I owed hundreds of dollars for infractions like improper landscaping and failure to display HOA membership decal. One even accused me of storing unregistered vehicles on my land, a laughable claim considering the only car I owned was parked neatly in my driveway every night. I tried speaking to some of my neighbors about it, hoping maybe they'd understand how absurd this was, but most avoided the subject altogether. Some gave me sympathetic nods, but said nothing, clearly too afraid of drawing the HOA's wrath onto themselves. Others looked at me like I was the problem, as though refusing to join the HOA made me some kind of villain disturbing their perfect little world. The isolation only fueled the HOA's confidence. One day, I came home to find a bright orange notice taped to my front door. Final warning in big, bold letters. It accused me of being in violation of community standards and demanded immediate payment of back fines. It also threatened that further action would be taken if non-compliance continued. That phrase stuck with me. Further action. What exactly did that mean? At first, I assumed it was just empty intimidation. But then the harassment crossed a line I never expected. Late one evening, I heard a loud knock at my door. Peeking through the window, I saw two men in dark uniforms, flashing badges, and claiming to be police. They said they were there because of HOA complaints. My stomach dropped until I looked closer. Something about their uniforms didn't add up. Their badges looked cheap, almost like they had been printed off a website, and the patches on their shoulders didn't match the local police department I knew. That's when it hit me. These weren't real cops. These were hired actors, sent by the HOA to intimidate me into obedience. I refused to open the door. I yelled through it instead, asking them for badge numbers, department affiliation, anything official. They couldn't answer. They stammered and got defensive, and within minutes, they were gone, retreating down my driveway in a car with no police markings. The realization left me shaken. This wasn't just about grass height or mailbox colors. The HOA was willing to impersonate law enforcement to intimidate me. If they were willing to go that far, what would be next? I started documenting everything. Every letter, every notice, every strange encounter. I took photos of the fake cops, copies of the fines, recordings of the board members lurking outside my property. I didn't know exactly where it would lead, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let them bully me into submission. But here's the part they never saw coming. While they were busy trying to break me down with harassment, they had overlooked a crucial detail. Something so big it would flip this entire battle on its head. You see, when I first bought my home, I didn't just purchase the house. I purchased the land, and a portion of that land extended into a small, undeveloped corner where the HOA had built their shiny little office. On paper, they were trespassing on property they didn't own. Their headquarters, their meeting space, the very symbol of their authority, was sitting on my land. At first, I wasn't sure what to do with this information. It felt like almost unreal, like I was staring at the blueprint of a secret weapon I hadn't meant to find. But the more the harassment continued, the more I realized how powerful this fact was. The HOA kept sending their bogus fines, they kept lurking outside my home, they even tried posting public notices on community boards labeling me as non-compliant and a danger to neighborhood order. They wanted everyone to see me as the problem child of the community. But with every petty move they made, I grew more certain about my next step. If they thought they could scare me into surrender, they were about to learn a painful lesson. Because this wasn't just about rules anymore. This wasn't about grass or mailboxes or even their fake police. This was about exposing the entire foundation of their power for what it really was, built on land that didn't belong to them. The question was, how do you bring down an entire HOA when the deck seems stacked in their favor? How do you turn the tables when your neighbors are too afraid to speak up and the board hides behind intimidation tactics? That was the puzzle I needed to solve. And when I finally decided how to play my hand, the HOA never saw it coming. The harassment had reached its boiling point. By now, the HOA had thrown everything they could at me. Fines, threats, fake cops, even community smear campaigns. And yet, I hadn't broken. What they didn't realize was that every step they took only tightened the noose around their own necks. When I finally decided to strike back, I knew it had to be in a way they couldn't ignore. Quiet resistance wasn't enough. This called for something public, undeniable, the kind of move that would not only clear my name, but expose them for who they really were. So I gathered my evidence. Every letter, every fake fine, photos of their so-called police officers, copies of the community notices that called me a danger. But at the heart of it all was the deed to my land, the proof that their precious HOA office wasn't theirs at all. I waited for the next big community meeting. The HOA always held these gatherings in their office, a place they considered their fortress of authority. They invited homeowners, handed out neatly stapled agendas, and carried themselves like royalty presiding over peasants. But that day, I walked into their office with a folder under my arm, not as a neighbor under their thumb, but as the rightful owner of the very floor beneath their feet. The meeting began the same as always, smug smiles from the board, chatter about community standards, a few residents timidly raising questions about landscaping fees or mailbox paint. Then, as expected, the board turned their attention to me. They spoke my name with disdain, parading me as their example of non-compliance. One of them even claimed they were preparing to take legal action against me for failing to pay thousands of fines. That's when I stood. My heart pounded, but my voice carried steady and clear. I laid my folder on the table in front of them and asked everyone in the room to pay close attention. First, I revealed the harassment, the fabricated fines, the impersonation of police, the endless stream of intimidation tactics. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Neighbors who had been silent for months looked stunned. Some even glanced nervously at the board, suddenly realizing just how far their beloved HOA had gone. But I wasn't done. With a slow, deliberate motion, I pulled out the land deed. I explained, line by line, how my property extended beyond my home, straight into the parcel where the HOA had built their headquarters. And then, with absolute certainty, I announced that the building we were standing in at that very moment was mine. The room erupted.